Guys, I have to be completely honest with you guys. And depending on how many of you watch these videos and stuff like that, I'm sure you're probably getting tired of a clickbaity title such as Final Fantasy VII Remake. But I have more to talk about this game. So much more. It's just... Oh, well, that's staying in the video. Okay, joking aside, I can't stop talking about Final Fantasy VII Remake. This is literally like one of the best games that have come out thus far. Now, keep in mind, yes, I played Final Fantasy 15 and I played through Kingdom Hearts 3, and I love both of them for equal reasons in their own right. But Final Fantasy VII Remake is a different kind of beast altogether, and if you've watched my review of it, you already know what to expect. If you haven't, go check it out. Obviously it'll be somewhere up here. But anyway, point is this. Final Fantasy VII Remake is a unique gaming experience, and it's only going to get better from here on out as we go through the series that they are developing right now. But with that being said, what all is there to like out of FF7 Remake? A lot, actually. And as the title of this video describes it, I'm going to be telling you all my favorite moments in FF7 Remake, as well as some of the bad ones I didn't think about. I don't want to look at them, but some of them are crucial. I'm going to progress this not so much in terms of a ranking scale, but rather how the story progresses, you know? Kind of give you the little feel of like, you know, which part is what and what are my personal favorites out of the game thus far. Obviously, I will try my best not to talk about the main gameplay mechanics themselves, but I feel like we need to talk about two of the major things that needs to be talked about. And the first one is obviously the way the bosses are demonstrated in the game. I kid you not whenever I say that the bosses literally are the best parts in the FF7 Remake. I cannot believe they actually went the way they did, and to an overwhelming amount. Just such a magnificent way of demonstrating the boss fights and best execution when it comes down to it, you know. Some of these bosses we're familiar with technically in the original game. Were they as epic and amazing? Technically not by a long shot, except for like maybe some of the human characters like Reno and Rude and of course Sephiroth at the end game and stuff like that. But the reality is that the other bosses themselves don't really stand out in terms of mindset. Some people would obviously think about the Sentinel Scorpion, obviously, but beyond that, would you remember Abuz? Probably not. You would remember his likeness, but he doesn't ring up as like an iconic boss in the game. And yet with the FF7 Remake, they all stand out on their own, and it makes for a really unique experience in my personal opinion. The other favorite thing that I love about this game when it comes down to the game mechanic is, of course, the ability to challenge summons. Technically, this was not part of the original Final Fantasy VII formula. Obviously, the only way you can get summon material is obviously finding them or earning them through different places and stuff, you know? If you saw a materia summon, you're more than likely going to try to attain it in some form of way. Either it's just plain out of existence, you see it right there and you can pick it up, or it's out of view and you have to try to figure out the puzzle on how to attain it, obviously. In this case, obviously it still carries over with a couple of materias, but the rest of them can be attained through attaining them through a VR simulation, where you fight the summons, and therefore after you beat them, you attain the materia in question. And they're all really fun, but the biggest one, obviously, and warning, spoiler alert, if you're watching this video, obviously it will be spoilers, but Bahamut. Let's put it this way, I was already familiar with the idea that Leviathan was tough, so I knew Bahamut was going to be the toughest of the tough, but boy, that was fun. That was, just to fight Bahamut alone was fun enough for me, and to see how powerful he is. And keep in mind, this is the first stage of Bahamuts. Technically, there are 3 in the main game. And what's even going to be more interesting is to see how many other versions of Bahamut we're going to see. You know, this is just one of many, so it's going to be interesting to see Neo Bahamut, Zero Bahamut, and even other versions of Bahamut they might even come up. Technically, there are like 2 others if you count Crisis Core and Advent Children. So, who's to say where Square's going to go with the Bahamuts? It's like, how many Bahamuts can you make? They're going to find out real quickly. Alright then, so real quickly, let's go ahead and talk about some of my personal favorites moments when it comes to the FF7 Remake. The first one is going to be the easiest one actually, and that actually happens literally in Chapter 3. Basically, you and Tifa finish up the day, you go to the bar and everything like that, and as Tifa goes to talk with Barrett about the next mission and stuff like that, Cloud is obviously by himself. You can do, you basically roam around, you can mess with the jukebox, or you can mess with the dartboard. The dartboard itself, while not so fascinating, but the settings itself makes it relaxing. Especially by the early parts of the game, you really only unlock like 2 or 3 soundtracks. And out of the 2 or 3, one of them in particularly I listened to a lot while doing the dartboard, and that was the fact that it was a prologue remix jukebox style. And it was very relaxing, very peaceful, and it was very interesting to kind of get this mood set of the fact that you have control of the jukebox while you're doing the darts themselves. And it's fun to do, and it's even funner to try to get to the max settings. Technically, when you achieve to the first place ranking, you get a luck up materia. And while the prize itself is okay, doing that was just a joy to do. It's like you're literally inside the world of Final Fantasy VII. You are literally in Midgard and you're just chilling, really. It is offsetting admittedly, but it was definitely something to behold. It was definitely something to enjoy out of it. Another small thing, and this actually carries out throughout the game rather, is that you get to see Cloud smile, like legitimately smile. Most of the time we see Cloud as this cold-hearted stare, you know, this bland face, you know. We don't really get to see Cloud really develop much in terms of different character personality, you know. We don't get to see him have different moods and stuff. But with this FF7 Remake, we get to see all the different moods that Cloud carries over, including his smile. And I don't know why this stands out to me the most, but every single time I see Cloud smile, I can't help but smile back in the process. Because, again, when you see Cloud, what do you see? The generic turned face. But now with the FF7 Remake, we get to see a more expressed Cloud. We get to see a better Cloud, or to most people, a better version of Cloud, you know? We're used to seeing Cloud as being the badass mercenary that he's known in the game, and that carries out into other versions, you know, obviously that of Dissidia, as well as Kingdom Hearts, Final Fantasy VII games themselves. So naturally, to see Cloud smile is just something, a different form of Cloud, but it's a Cloud that most of us enjoy, actually. We like to see him interact with the world and to get a different perspective, to get a different view, and to get a different feeling. While there may be some cases that stand out most where it was like awkward, but really, in all honesty, when you think about Cloud's backstory and stuff like that, it kind of makes sense for why he kind of acts the way he does. And so, to see the occasional smile is something to always look forward to. Really, it does. Okay, so now we're going to finally talk about the best moments and everything like that. One of them, obviously, starting out in Chapter 4. Chapter 4 technically never happened in the main game. It never happened in the original. You never really got to hang out with Briggs, Wedge, or much less Jessie. You didn't really get to know them very well, but in the remake, we're allowed to get a deeper character dialogue with all 3 of them, and this is precious to me, because to me, not only do you get to know them more as characters, you got to know more about their personality, what they feel, what they do, what they were doing before joining Avalanche, what their lifestyle was like and stuff. And really, Chapter 4 kind of goes beyond that step for these 3 characters, because the settings changes from where you're normally doing a Final Fantasy VII game to where all of a sudden you're doing a weird slice of life feel for Final Fantasy VII. You know, you see Cloud hanging out with E3 because technically Jessie hired him to help her out with a particular project. And Briggs and Wedge ends up joining along anyway, and it's really fun, it's really interesting. I love how in-depth they went with the trio, you know? And the bad thing is, if you played Final Fantasy VII before, and you're playing this, and you end up feeling for these 3, you can't tell me that you started to feel really, really regretful because you knew what was going to happen. You knew what was going to happen, you knew how they ended up, and you just didn't want to go through it. You realized that you were falling in love with these 3 characters. You fall in love with how they interact and stuff, and they're just a joy to be with. And then you realize, oh crap, I know what's gonna happen. I'm not looking forward to it. And obviously, yes, it's not very good. I can imagine most people ended up starting crying because they literally was like, I love these characters and then they're dying on me, and or based on the ending, maybe not. It's confusing because I don't know what happens. But that's a different story entirely. We'll get to that eventually. But for the time being right now, yes, the trio, Jesse, Briggs, and Wedge, that was really awesome. I really loved it. That actually all of Chapter 4 was really good because you got to be introduced to the bike part of the game. You know, there's only 2 moments in the game where it actually happens, where you're riding on the bike and you're fighting enemies and stuff. And really, most of the time, most games, whenever they do that, you know, they do like a segue type thing where it's not really the main focus of the game, but they kind of segued it into the main game itself. Sometimes they don't do so well, but in this version, they did really well. They really made it good. And, you know, that's kind of hard to do when it comes to stuff like that, especially just riding the bike and then attacking enemies on the side. But really, they did really good. And even more so because obviously there are technically 2 bosses that you would actually fight in this particular setup using the bikes and stuff. And the way they demonstrate the bosses, they are absolutely fantastic. They're epic. They're just over-the-top action, really. It truly is over-the-top action. And to kind of follow up in that same way, I love Roach. He is basically a soldier character that was introduced into the remake, which is funny because technically we don't get to know very many soldiers except for Cloud and Zack in the series of Final Fantasy VII. So it's like we really don't know any more different soldier members except for the main ones that we're familiar with. And so to see a new character be introduced and it worked so well, I really enjoyed it, Roach. I really do. It was a different personality because it's kind of a weird personality trait, but I feel like he's kind of like the Kenpachi Saraki, or even for that matter, the Dante of Final Fantasy VII. Like, let that picture through your head. The way he rides that bike, it's almost as if he was actually riding an actual horse. And I think that was the main purpose, is that it wants to give you that feeling that he's riding a horse. And it's a weird setup, but it's also a familiar setup because technically, if anyone has seen Advent Children, you're familiar with how Cloud and the others are fighting while riding motorcycles. It's an insane, it's an insane scene to see, but even more insane when you're performing it or seeing it in the game. It's really fun and entertaining, and even getting to fight Roach by himself when he's not on the bike was really fun to do, because that was the first introduction, really, of fighting human-like bosses, and that was going to be something interesting to see how that carried out afterwards. In fact, speaking of human-like bosses, that carries over to my next favorite, where you got to fight Reno and Rude. Technically, this carries over in Chapter 9, I believe? I'm losing track now all of a sudden from here on out, but fighting those two was fun. You know, the way they displayed the scene for you for fighting Reno in the church and then Rude in this little corral area before Aeris' house. Getting to fight both of them was a real joy, because it literally is, and I'm probably going to be repeating this over and over again, it felt like Advent Children. You know, the way that it was displayed, the way you fought them, and the way it was kind of like this over-the-top action, and it was just, it was a joy. It was really a joy, and even more of a joy when you got to the scene where you got to fight both of them, technically, up at the top of the pillar, and that was really fun. You know, you got to be familiar with Reno the first time, and then Rude, and then to fight both of them at the same time at the top of the pillar. That was fun, and I think from then on out, I think most of us realized that, much like in Kingdom Hearts, yes, we're going to fight over-the-size, powerful bosses, but we're also going to fight human-sized bosses, and they're going to be just as epic, if not even more insane, than the giant version bosses. So it's going to be interesting to see how we're going to see this go even further, because technically, we get to fight more human-like characters as the series goes on, obviously. And still, like I said, just to be able to fight both Reno and Rude in the style that they have it. I don't think it would be any better if it was turn-based. It may be interesting, but it wouldn't be as nearly as exciting as how the action-based that we got to see in the remake. The way they were displayed and the way they were used was truly some of the best moments in the game itself alone. And again, we're still going on from here on out, because going back a little bit towards the scene where Cloud and Aerith are trying to get into Corneo's manor, his little penthouse place. I know some people are probably going to hate it because technically they did change it just a bit. And I say just a bit because while, yes, they've changed it to where it's almost unrecognizable, it's still technically there in its likeness, if not in a better way. Technically, Aerith, as well as Tifa and Cloud, have different alternative dresses that they can dress in the game. With Tifa, it's based on if you complete the missions, and then you can choose whichever dress she wears. If you don't complete all the missions, technically she wears her default dress. Aerith's dress is based on how many side quests you do during the chapter that you're in Aerith's town in Sector 5. And then, of course, with Cloud, it is based on what side quests he does in the chapter... no, I think actually it is chapter... Is it chapter 8 or chapter 9? Again, I'm going to be completely lost count of different chapters, but in that chapter alone, depending on which set of side quests you do, you have the chance of getting one of two different dresses. And then, of course, if you do none of them, you'll just get the base one. But while all that's really good and all that's fun to do, and especially to see the different dresses that come up, what really stood out the most as being like the best moment in that chapter was the dance scene with both Cloud and Andreo. Whatever made them come up with this ideal, they were a genius during this moment, and it was just entertainment. Now, when it comes to dance sequences like rhythm-based games, it's usually standard. You see the scene happening, and then you see the button show up that you press the button. This is different, however, because while technically you do see the buttons that needs to be pushed during this moment, they almost blend in with the environment. You don't get to see them until literally the last moments. You see the entire dance sequence in whole, and you just get to enjoy the dance sequence, but at the same time you're frantic because you're trying to figure out, okay, when is the next one? Oh gosh! In a split second it just shows up, and you're just kind of like in this daze of like, oh my gosh, what did I just see? What did I just witness? How did I do? You know? Because there are different ratings in which where, depending on how well you did or how poor you did, Aerith will make a comment. But it was interesting that this dance sequence was even in the game. And while technically the side missions and stuff kind of changed things around and stuff like that, the main dancing part was a joy to watch. It was a joy to interact with, but it was a joy to watch mostly because, again, this is insane. It was fun. That's the best way to explain it. This was fun to experience. It wasn't just some random thing that was added. It was something to behold. It was something truly amazing, in my personal opinion. Now, of course, we got to mention some of these things that they've extended in terms of stages. Now, of course, this is being played on a chapter-based playthrough, where you're basically going through each chapter from beginning to end of the chapter, much like how Final Fantasy XIII has done this before. And while some people may have not liked this, there were some stuff that I actually kind of liked. Like some of the stuff that they've extended on, I actually liked it. Like some people didn't like how the train graveyard was extended, but to me, that wasn't bad, really. In all honesty, that was one of my least favorite stuff that they did, was that they extended the train graveyard. They kind of turned it into this creepy atmosphere, kind of this spooky feel, because you were being haunted by ghost children per se, but ghosts all together, and it was really interesting, and especially when you got to fight the two bosses, the Ghoul and then of course Elor. Both of them was, again, because of bosses the way they've done it in Final Fantasy VII Remake, they were really enjoyable to fight, but enjoyable to witness as well. And so to extend a chapter or two, to extend an area just to give us a couple of extra bosses, I graciously appreciate it, actually. I truly do, you know? This kind of gives me an idea of, like, Are there other areas that they will expand upon to give us more variety and to give us more chances to fight bosses and stuff, you know? Is this a possibility? And if so, yeah, I'd be happy for it. Again, not everyone will agree on this one, but some of these chapters aren't that bad, especially if they extended it the right way and if it works in terms of the story, which in some cases it actually does. But my favorite moment, and again, a lot of them are my favorites, but really was actually towards the ending. So again, major spoiler if you haven't beaten it yet, but while technically the ending played a little bit off script, I actually really loved the ideal concept that you had to fight Sephiroth as the final boss. This threw me off so badly because on the one mindset, I was like, I don't know if I like this, but then after fighting the boss and then hearing the music, they recompose One Wing Angel, and oh my gosh, I love how it sounds, and I love fighting Sephiroth. That was so much fun. Again, we're gonna continue this. This was over the top action. This was just the best display, and it was so good. I mean, seriously, if we had to run off script just a chance to fight Sephiroth before the end of part 1, I'm happy. I'm glad they gave us a taste of what's to come when it comes to fighting Sephiroth, because quite frankly, that was good. That was fun. It's just, again, just having the opportunity to fight Sephiroth. Again, it was off script, but again, to experience that is a joy. And so in my personal opinion, while yes, we had to go through a few hiccups along the way, it was still so amazing to fight Sephiroth, and it was so fun to kind of end this first chapter into what's going to lead on into a major adventure, a major rediscovery of Final Fantasy VII in the best way that they can possibly deliver. And I'm looking forward to the series. But unfortunately, much like the games everybody is familiar with and stuff like that, for every good, there is always a down part. And there are a few down parts that I had with the game. There's a few least favorable moments that I had. There are very few, and some of them, while yes, they were a little bit of a hindrance, they didn't sour the experience for me, except for one, but that is slowly changing into a possibility. We'll talk about that in just a sec. So, the first particular moment that kind of reduced me was the bandit scene. I've talked about it in my review, but the bandit scene I felt was a little dragged on. Like, that particular scene right there, if they were trying to go for like a particular event or something that involved them, I would have felt better if they just made them generic enemies and nothing more, because really, in all honesty, they were just, I mean, they play off the corny, stupid bad guy trope, the stupid idiot thieves and stuff like that, you know? And while sometimes it works, in this case, they were more of an annoyance rather than just entertainment. With the exception of the fact that after you first encounter them and fought them, where they basically was like laying fake dead and they were basically just keeping quiet and stuff. That was funny, but I would have liked it better if Cloud said some kind of badass quote or made them kind of shake in their boots and stuff, because in all honesty, they weren't the favorite of mine, unfortunately. Again, there are better moments in the game compared to that one. But there was another one that I felt dragged on a little way too long. And sadly, this played a part in Chapter 17. So, while the end part of Chapter 17 was great, the beginning part of the chapter was not so great. So, technically in Chapter 17, Cloud technically fell unconscious due to Sephiroth interacting with his mind, trying to control him and stuff. Of course, Cloud wakes up in Aeris' previous bedroom. Aeris tells them of the fact that she's technically an ancient, and so while the team themselves, you go out and try to not only get to the president's room, but to stop Hojo in some form of way. Well, that doesn't work out. Instead, that counter works, because Hojo is then using you as a form of research for his development of science and stuff. Whatever he's doing, which I really didn't see what he was mostly doing. I only saw the fact that he was acknowledging the fact that Sephiroth was there, and he took Genova. So that was the only thing I saw, but if he was testing anything, I think he was testing how strong the group was as a union, as a team that was working together and stuff. So that might have been what he was trying to do, but in the long run, I felt like he overstayed his welcome. In fact, I felt like the entire time we was in there for longer than we should. That was not a good way to do Chapter 17, I don't think. That was one of the least favorite things that I had to go through. But until you get out of the laboratory, out of there, and into the main Shinra Hall where you're fixing to find the president and stuff, that was better. But the beginning parts definitely dragged. It kind of sucked, really. And unfortunately, I don't want to talk about them. I don't want to talk about them because on the one hand, I felt like they don't contribute anything except to kind of segue into a different story segment and try to make a unique feel. But at the same time, I kind of like them, especially if they're going the route that I think they're going. So, if you don't know, technically there is one major element that is played in the remake, and that are these beings, these Dementor-looking creatures. I guess they're a creature, I'm not sure what they are. They certainly ain't human. But these things are always in the game. You see them first whenever you encounter Aerith, and Aerith is more or less the only one who can see them up until she comes into contact with Cloud. Once Cloud gets into contact, slowly but surely, other people are able to see these weird Dementor things. And it isn't until literally Chapter 17 that you start to find out what they are. And they are called the Whispers. So, as Whispers, what do they do? What do they contribute? Well, from what we've heard so far, they basically do only one thing, and that's to guide the wheels of fate to the ultimate destiny. Make certain that destiny course is never changed, never segues, is always in the straight and narrow. So in other words, the best way I can say it, they're basically guiding the story in case the story tries to segue out a bit. And at first it was confusing. At first it didn't make sense at all, except for a few rare moments. Now these rare moments, you wouldn't realize it, and at first you'd be like, why did they do this? This is a weird segue, until you think to yourself, what if this is going a completely different route? So bear with me whenever I say this, because this is going to be a whole different thing, but I'm going to try the best I can to summarize the Whispers. The Whispers, as we've heard, are basically guidelines to the road to destiny, Destiny's highway road. And the Whispers only interact when something is being out of place, whenever something happens and they have to intervene. For example, the team comes in across with Sephiroth. They try to kill Sephiroth. The Whispers will stop at nothing to stop the characters from breaking the cycle of where Sephiroth is supposed to do his one thing, and then that's it. They let Sephiroth leave, but then after Sephiroth leaves, the Whispers disappear, to which the party members are left in confusion. Another example is that of, technically there's a scene where Sephiroth basically stabs his sword into Barrett. Assumingly kills Barrett, but Barrett doesn't die. The reason is because a Whisper helps Barrett and saves him, heals him, and is like, that's weird, because technically they're trying to stop us from stopping Sephiroth, yet they counteract to save us. So that makes sense. But then another rare occasion of where, technically speaking, in another chapter after the pillar breaks and the plate falls, you go into the underground laboratory research facility where you discover these weird creatures, these weird beings. And then you discover this laboratory in which where humans are being experimented and turned into these creatures. But then the Whisper shows up. The Whisper shows up to where they basically throw you out of the underground laboratory, because technically that doesn't happen in the main game. To continue onward, Hojo mentions that Cloud isn't technically a real soldier. Once he said that, the Whispers all of a sudden charge at him and scares the living daylight out of JoJo, interrupting his dialogue. So we're talking about a weird scenario in which we're playing a different version of Final Fantasy VII. Technically, Final Fantasy VII has already taken place. The history of 7 is complete. We know what happens. What if the remake is telling a different story? You know, what if 7 is like telling us a different segment section in which where an alternate path has been unlocked, but you have to get through Destiny's hands and try to do the best you can to change fate. Now, I don't know if that's the case, and I don't even know if that is what their intentions are. But the best way to explain what I mean whenever I say the phrase that it could be an alternative path that we're seeing, an alternate history, an alternate world of Final Fantasy VII, is towards the ending, in which where you are able to best the Whispers in their Omega form at this rate. You best them, and you see a scene in which where Zack somewhat survives. Because technically, in Final Fantasy VII and in Crisis Core, Zack dies. Because after encountering the Shinra soldiers and fighting for survival in order to protect Cloud and stuff, he ends up being overwhelmed and basically overpowered to a point to where the last remaining soldiers almost kill him up until the last end. And then, of course, before Zack dies, he hands his sword to Cloud and tells him to carry on his legacy. So, that is interesting because technically we see Zack carrying Cloud to Midgar. Technically that didn't happen. Zack dies at the cliff. And yet he's carrying Cloud even further. So I'm not sure if we're seeing a different form of Destiny or what, but either way, I'm looking forward to seeing where the story progresses. Again, I hate the Whispers because of how weird they are, how unfamiliar they are, how absolutely abstract they are between what is considered the main path versus what they need to do. Because keep in mind, they're keeping Sephiroth alive to a certain degree, and in some points you see the Whisperers trying to stop Sephiroth from doing a certain thing or two. So it looks like they're trying to guide the pieces into their proper places. Because obviously they're saving Barret, which means Barret is the key to the final event. But at the same time, it feels weird. Again, we're not familiar with what's going on with the 7 Remake, but we know one thing for certain. What they've done so far and what they've changed and what they've done differently, most of us are looking forward to it. We're looking forward to seeing where the future goes from here and what happens from here on out. So for those of us that are sticking to this and are looking forward to it, you're like me, you can't wait to see what happens afterwards. And for those of us who didn't like it or just flat out hate it, I completely understand, but really in all honesty, for those of us who enjoy it, we're looking forward to seeing what happens. This is definitely going to be an interesting series from here on out. So thank you so much for watching. These were just some of my favorite moments as well as my least favorite moments. But from here on out, it's only going to get better from here, hopefully. So thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you in the next video. Catch you guys later.